Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show, Science Dispatch, episode 60. My name is Cameron English, your host as always, joined, as I usually am, by Dr. Chuck Dinnerstein, Director of Medicine here at the American Council on Science and Health. And I want to say for like the third week in 5 weeks, we've got the man, the J-Man, Dr. Joshua Bloom.
The J-Man is here.
Director of Chemical and Pharmaceutical Sciences. He's a sharp cookie because we don't give that title to everyone.
I gave it to myself. It's meaningless. And my wife tells me I sound like an idiot for using it, but that never stopped me. So I'm the J-Man.
All three of us are married, and I think we can all recognize our wives say lots of things, and some things helpful, other things, incidentally, before we move forward, I have to say, Josh insulted my recent hair loss, and I feel kind of offended by that. I'm not going to lie, Josh. I have a 2-year-old and a 6-month pregnant wife, so things have been intense lately. So you mocking my increasing baldness is offensive. What do you have to say?
By the way, no, I'm serious. Like a few months ago, when I was. Are you really losing your hair, or does it just look like a mess?
It could be either. It's probably a combination of both.
Because you can stop it.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Is it like raw honey or something?
No. It's apple cider vinegar. No. A few months ago, after my haircut, they took a mirror up there.
Sorry, Chuck.
I'm looking at this. You know what? There's a bald spot up there. This is unsatisfactory. So I opened up an old bottle of Proscar, which is for benign prostatic hyperplasia. In other words, in a large prostate. But that's a 5 milligram dose you take. They sell a 1 milligram version called Propecia, which actually works for hair loss. It stops it and reverses it. So I was taking all these Proscars and chopping them into fifths. And the pill's about the size of a neon atom to begin with. So you need a real good chopper. I swear, 3 months later, I look after the haircut and it's grown back.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Wow.
It really kind of brings the end to Ron Popeil and the spray-on hair. I think it's so sad.
Yeah, because it looked so natural. But I'm not kidding. And you can get it online.
Of course.
With a prescription from some shyster in whatever. But it costs like $6 a month or something. And it really, really works.
Well, there you go. I'll look up some huckster in Brunswick, New Jersey with an MD, and he'll give me a prescription.
Hey.
All right. Enough of this foolishness. Let's get into our stories for the day. We've got two as usual. Dr. Bloom is the author of the first one. I'm the author of the second. And Chuck's here just to give his insightful commentary, as he always has. So, first story is called Tylenol plus Advil combo, Innovation or Exploitation. The second story is called Anatomy of a Pesticide Scare, the Phony Whistleblower Gambit. So we'll get to that in a second. Josh, let me read the introduction here, and then you can break down what your complaint is. And as usual, you're not shy about your opinion. So you write, since 2020, we have been able to buy Advil dual action, over-the-counter pills that contain a fixed dose of acetaminophen, Tylenol, and ibuprofen, Advil. Who benefits from combining two medicines into one pill? Is it patients or GSK that makes the product? I maintain it's the latter. Okay, take it away, Josh. What's going on here?
Well, in my occasionally humble opinion, this not only doesn't help patients, but it in some ways can harm them. You know what? I back up on that a little. It can help them in that most people, and I mean 90 whatever percent, have no idea of what pain relievers you can take together. And I tell them this, and they're, I'm talking like educated people, and that, can I take a leave with Advil, with naproxen? They just don't know. And, almost no one knows that you can take Tylenol with Advil or one of the others without any, overlap or any effects. You can take it both at a lower dose. So that's actually helpful because, like, my stomach doesn't tolerate Advil very well. So instead of 400 milligrams, I get by with 2 and a couple of Tylenol, and it seems to work about as well. There's good evidence that the combination is actually useful, which is one of the only times that acetaminophen is really useful. So it's helpful in that people who are running up and down the hopelessly complicated analgesic aisle, they're not going to know what to do. And if they see this product and they take it, it can be helpful in that it's going to give them a lower dose of both drugs with, more or less the same effect. But if you already know that, or your doctor tells you, which you should, then this is not helpful, because although you're taking the two together, it's a fixed dose of each, and you cannot vary that. So I don't think Glaxo's reason for putting this on the market was to educate anyone. It's just part of this trend of combining multiple drugs, and I mentioned Robitussin that takes this just to another universe later in the article, so they can sell more. I mean, I can't think of any other reason why the company would do it.
So there's a couple things to hit here. The first that was interesting to me is that they had to get FDA approval to put these drugs on the market. And when they did the clinical trials, they combined the drugs, but then they compared them to each active ingredient separately.
Yeah.
And the FDA signed off on that. And I think you said a minute ago, it's technically correct that combined they work better than either drug individually. But do you think the FDA should have said, well, you can't put this on the market because these are already on the market and you're just going to mark up the price? Is that their place to say that, or should they have put a label on it or something or anything? What do you think?
There's, they ran clinical trials. Obviously, at those doses, both drugs are going to be safe. So they ran trials on efficacy. They came up with a couple of numbers, doses for the two. The FDA's got to approve that.
Okay.
But why do they do it though?
Okay, so I'm gonna
jump in,
make a quick medical argument, and then I'll jump back out. There is a problem with compliance when we're talking about medications taken for chronic illness. I understand that we don't usually take dual action Tylenol for chronic illness, but I think that does influence how the regulators consider things. And as you add pills to a medication regimen, the compliance in taking that drops. The best example of this kind of fixed combination pill that seems to have a lot of traction is what's called a poly pill, which consists of 10 milligrams of atorvastatin, 2.5 milligrams of elodipine, 25 milligrams of losartan, and 12.5 milligrams of hydrochlorothiazide. And it's used as an overall treatment for coronary artery disease. And in countries where coming up with 4 different pills would be a logistical nightmare. And this one particular fixed combination has shown great improvement in those populations. And I think that from a purely medical point of view is an important consideration. When you take it to the over-the-counter market, I think that the argument falls apart a little bit, but I don't think we should throw out the baby with the bathwater. There is some advantage to fixed dose medications for chronic illness in enhancing the compliance of the patient population.
Well, I would call the 4-dose pill innovative.
It is.
Right? I mean,
yes,
that is real innovation. It's you take a pill, your heart's better. This is not. This is salesmanship.
Yes, and I think that when you showed all that Robitussin choices, you get paralysis by analysis. It becomes difficult in the aisle to choose which is the right combination of whatever.
I sometimes have trouble myself just having to look through the ingredients, which are written in 0.1 Helvetica, just trying to see what the hell I'm going to be swallowing. And it tastes terrible too. But
the question everyone needs to address when they buy medicine.
Well, if you have to gag down cough syrup and you pick cherry flavored Robitussin, it's coming back up, baby. I'm just telling you, nobody keeps that stuff down. It's terrible.
Well, in all seriousness, I think there's actually a deeper point there about the selection. So recently my wife caught COVID over the Christmas break, and she's fine. She recovered and everything. But as I mentioned, she's pregnant and she's sick, and it really sucks. So I'm going to the store, and the selection of medicines is limited because she's pregnant. And then, of course, you have to, you want to get the best one for your money. But then, as Josh points out, there's like, in the article, I think you said there's like a combination of 12 different varieties you can choose from, So I don't remember how many I saw on the shelf at CVS when I was there, but I remember distinctly going, what the hell, which one of these should I buy, So I'm an average guy. I can imagine there's a lot of people that are frustrated by that. So either of you, what are your thoughts on that?
First of all, it's not 12. I found another which has no cough syrup in it at all. It's just like acetaminophen and Benadryl to help you sleep. So it's Robitussin, like Mr. Roby, Mr. Robbins, of course, is like spinning around in his grave. There's no cough syrup in it, but they're selling it with a cough syrup. Now, to get back to the point, though, the real sleaze in this, and you see this in bad papers all over the place, is the comparison they did. Of course, the two of them together work better than either alone. They did not compare the two of them to them together with the Advil combo pill. And you know very well what would have happened there. It would have been identical if you chose the same dose.
Yeah. There's two other points in the article. And Chuck, one of them's from you, the other one's from our colleague, Dr. Henry Miller. And I'm hoping you can address both of these. So the first one has to do with adjusting the dosage of the medication, which I hadn't considered, obviously, because I'm not a doctor. But this is an important point that Henry makes. And then you say there's an issue with the therapeutic window of these different drugs. You put them all in one bottle or whatever, and it kind of limits their efficacy. So can you talk about both of those?
Yeah, I think that Henry and I were kind of heading in the same direction. That every drug has a therapeutic window, a range at which the drug is efficacious and a point at which it becomes toxic or has increasing adverse effects, and that's particularly true for acetaminophen and liver problems. So that when you're taking a fixed medication, you don't have the ability to change that dose around. And I think that, as Josh pointed out in the article, when you start taking more than one medication, a lot of these medications seem to have Tylenol as a almost a, and this is the air quote part, supplement within them. Since, if we really get back into it, Josh will be happy to rant about the fact that Tylenol doesn't work at all. So, that further, with respect to the Tylenol, it makes it more difficult to stay within the safe doses if you're not carefully reading the labels and seeing how much of the Tylenol is each of the products you're taking.
The combo pill, though, is not likely to run into a problem with Tylenol because it's got a relatively small amount. It's when you're taking Tylenol on top of some kind of a cough syrup that's full of Tylenol is when you can run into trouble. So let me give you my kitchen analogy for the combination. So here's something really innovative. Sometimes you put salt on food, sometimes you put pepper, and sometimes you put both. Let's put them both in a bottle and call it Spepper. If you don't like, there's too much pepper in it, you're screwed. If it's too salty, you're screwed. So that's the titration thing that Henry and Chuck were talking about. And it's a pretty good analogy because once they're combined, they're combined.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you guys right, this is more or less just a marketing gimmick by a pharma company. Sort of like the way a fast food place just recombines their ingredients and they give it a funny name and then they charge you an extra $2 for it, except this could, impact your health potentially.
Yes. Now, and I like to just add as an unshameful advertisement that Josh is not done talking about this problem with over-the-counter medications and has an article that just came out on the website talking about from Voltaren, which is well worth the read.
Yeah, it's more Glaxo, and it's even sleazier than this.
But for another day.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I'm sure it'll get traction, and we'll discuss it. Incidentally, it's amusing to me that we get called pharma shills all the time. Because Josh, I want to say you spend like 66% of your work hours just ripping on the pharmaceutical industry. And yet here we are, right? Every time we write something about, a popular topic, especially Josh gets the pharma shill, big corporate apologist, right? So.
Not so much anymore, though. It's decreased a lot.
Your hatred of pharmaceutical gimmicks?
No,
I haven't been called a shill in a while.
Oh, wow.
It kind of stopped.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm out of the loop apparently. Well, my apologies to our previous haters who I guess are leaving us alone these days. Okay. All right. We'll leave that there. That's a really good article. I found it helpful just as a consumer. This is why ACSH does good stuff and you should read our articles. Okay, let's move on though and talk about this phony whistleblower gambit that I have in mind. So here's the introduction to my story, and then we'll dive into this a little bit. So I write, environmental activists rely on several go-to tactics when fomenting fear of pesticides. One of their favorite methods is recruiting fake whistleblowers, often retired government scientists, who will spread conspiratorial nonsense about regulatory agencies and other researchers. Here's a real-world example of the phony whistleblower gambit. So as you can tell, just like Josh, I'm very subtle, and I pull my punches. So over the Christmas break, I was doom scrolling on Twitter, as I shouldn't have been, and I came across this article by an old friend of ours named Carrie Gillum, who is a pretty well-known anti-pesticide activist. She used to write for Reuters, and then she left, and there were apparently some suspicions and concerns that she was using her platform as a reporter to flog for trial lawyers, which is what she does openly now. But in any case, the story is about a weed killer called paraquat. It's been used for decades now. And there's some allegations that we'll get into that it causes Parkinson's disease. And Gillum's story is about a former EPA official named Karen McCormick. And she worked in the Office of Pesticide Safety and Toxic Substances. I think that's what it's called, something like that. But her specialty was pesticide toxicity. And now that she's retired, she was there for 40 years, she's going around to The Guardian, where Gillum writes, and she's going to other major media outlets, and she's saying EPA scientists are afraid to speak their minds. And so what you end up with is an agency that either is in the pocket of the pesticide industry, or you have upstanding scientists at the EPA who are afraid to do their job. And so they just end up rubber stamping these chemicals, the reviews of these chemicals, and putting them on the market. And that's the premise of her article. And then I just go through and rip this apart, if I can put it politely. It's just an awful allegation. There's a couple of things we can get into, but before we get into, I guess, the conspiratorial political side of it, Josh, let's talk about the chemistry involved here. And take as much time as you want. But I guess the basic idea is paraquat, in terms of its chemical structure, looks very similar to an impurity that shows up in illicit opioids sometimes. And so because of that similarity, there was a lot of speculation that paraquat had the same sort of effects that this impurity in the drug did. Namely, it caused Parkinson-like symptoms in a lot of people, including some recreational drug users, which you've written about. Now, as it turns out, this doesn't hold, right? There's been a lot of research on this. But before we go any further, can you maybe stop and just explain as briefly as you can, what the chemistry revealed here?
Well, paraquat looks like the names in this, the chemical names in this article are difficult. But, back in the 80s, some idiot at DuPont, I think, was trying to make a Demerol analog and ended up not putting the reaction in an ice bath like he should have for the last step. So it actually did the reaction and then it did something else. And that caused an impurity called MPTP. So that was fine. Well, not so fine, but that itself wasn't any big deal, except once it got into the brain, it was metabolized by monoamine oxidase enzyme. And that turned it into something called MPP plus. And that gave people Parkinson's permanently and immediately. Because it just was, I wrote this years ago, but it was a poison for a particular cell, a particular type of neuron. So paraquat can't do that. And it's very hard to discuss the chemistry here without sounding like a chemist. But all I can say is that the comparable reaction in which this toxic metabolite was formed, it does not happen in paraquat. I really can't explain mechanistically why.
Yeah,
but
you don't have to. I think, but the basic point that maybe you can talk about is MPTP crosses the blood-brain barrier, and then that MPP molecule you're talking about, that is the heavy hitter that does all the damage, and that doesn't happen with paraquat.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I mean, paraquat is it doesn't. It's a doubly charged cation. So it's got two different nitrogens, each having a methyl group, and the nitrogen is positively charged. I know people are jumping off out of windows now, but the only reason I bring this up is because paraquat is not the kind of molecule that's going to get into the brain, not even close.
Okay.
Whereas the precursor for MPP plus is exactly the kind of chemical that will get into the brain. It's a low molecular weight amine you can just look at it and you see it's got the right amount of lipophilicity and water solubility and size, and it's just the perfect chemical to cross the blood-brain barrier. Paraquat cannot do that. Its vague resemblance to MPP plus ends once it gets knocking on the brain and said, hey, let me in. And the brain will go, no, you're not even remotely dressed properly.
I think that was a much better explanation.
Yeah. Well, you got to talk chemistry to people. They hate chemistry. They hate chemists. They don't know what I'm talking about. So they put me on the spot.
You did great, though. You did great.
Right. It's just the two are comparable to people who don't know any better and to people who are having it shoved down their throat by people who pretend they know better.
Chuck, I'm wondering if you have thoughts here, because you've written a lot about math magic in epidemiology and a lot of the dubious work that goes on in some of these papers. And,
The piece that struck me the most in what you wrote was when you began to talk for a moment about, well, two things. Regulatory capture, one of my favorite terms that I learned at business school, which talks about how an interest group is successful at influencing the staff or the commission to get what they want. And what I found fascinating about this is that regulatory capture, according to our politics, only goes in one direction. Regulatory capture is always by the corporations over the regulators. But this is a lovely example of the revolving door going in the other direction, because McCormick has been captured by the anti-pesticide forces and is serving her role as an expert witness and cashing in the same way that corporations will attempt to influence the regulators. And I think that we need to start recognizing that regulatory capture can occur in both directions, and that a lot of what we see in this whole area of pesticides is what Henry referred to as regulation through litigation, that we have a large group of bureaucrats that are not willing to actually do the job that they were hired to do for whatever reason. And as a result, they make some rules and say, well, the courts will separate it out and decide what we really mean down the line. And I think we're starting to see that, more and more in our bureaucracies. People are more than willing to take the federal pay and the great federal pension, but are not willing to do the work while they're there. I mean, we saw it this week. When you look at the FAA and Boeing, you don't need a better example.
Right. Yeah, that's a real problem. That's related to the point I was asking you about. So we've got people like McCormick, and she's not the only one. There are a lot of people, they come out of their bureaucratic careers and they go work for an activist group. And then this is the story they always tell, is that, I worked at this place for 40 years, but everyone else in the place is it's a corporate scumbag, or they're too afraid to, yes, do what they're supposed to. But me, I'm the one, now that I'm retired, I'm going to speak the truth, right? I find that a little bit convenient. And of course, she's talking to Gillum, writing for The Guardian, which is hardly a reliable newspaper, but they have a huge audience and they have a reputation going back many years. So that whole part of it amuses me. And then when we look into the science of it, like Josh was just talking about, and we look at the studies that are done, if you force feed a rodent paraquat, bad things are going to happen. And if you drink it, which some people foolishly do in suicide attempts, bad things happen because it's a pesticide. It's meant to kill weeds. It's not meant to kill people, right? So don't use it that way, I guess, is the point I'm making. But all of that to say, McCormick has to know these basic points, right? She has to understand the toxicology at least as well as we do, because she did it for 4 decades. Right. So any thoughts on that? It amuses me that like they're going to preen about how much of a threat this is without discussing any of these details.
Again, the time to say this is when you are actually at the job. Mm-hmm. There are safeguards in place. You're not going to be fired for saying what you think. You may not get promoted.
Right.
But yeah, the broom closet. The broom closet will make a lovely office too.
Well, Chuck, I remember you wrote a story a couple years ago now about a survey that was done of EPA staff. And one of their, I believe it was anonymous, one of their primary complaints was, I'm routinely overruled by my bosses who have a different specialty or different expertise than I do. So as you mentioned, right, politics does influence these federal agencies, but nonetheless, there are people that are willing to say, I would prefer if I could just, be a chemist and do my work without having some bean counter above me tell me the conclusion beforehand, right? So
exactly. Well, again, you get into that problem of science the verb, science the noun. And most of, I think that the people going into regulatory science are interested in science the verb. But unfortunately, at some point, the rubber hits the road and they have to switch to science as the noun and stop being uncertain and say, it's this or it's that, because that's how our regulations are written. They're written with numbers and guidelines and so on and so forth. And I think that that's a problem for somebody that's purely interested in knowledge and science per se.
Cameron, I want to clarify what I was speaking about earlier. All right, paraquat is not the type of molecule to cross the blood-brain barrier, but that doesn't mean it's safe.
Right.
If you drink it, or even worse, inhale it, it does really bad lung damage.
Right.
It's just it just the immediate permanent Parkinson's, they called them frozen addicts at the time, that a single dose, this is not going to happen with Parkinson's. It's not to say it's completely benign or anything like that. It will be toxic in certain situations and certain ways of consuming it, but it's not set up to do the same thing that MPPT did in the brain.
Yeah.
So I think Cameron mentions in the article that most of the cases where there was injuries associated with the pesticide in occupational settings were because it was used improperly, or that this proper safeguards in its use were not observed. So it's not that it's a benign drug; it's that it comes with a set of handling requirements, and if you screw around with the handling requirements, there may be health consequences.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a couple of things we should add. So it's a restricted use pesticide. So if you go to Home Depot and you say, "Where's the paraquat?" they're just going to look at you funny because they don't sell it. In order to use it, you have to be a licensed pesticide. Wait a minute.
I'd like to defend Home Depot. They will tell you which aisle they think it might be in.
Okay, fair enough. They'll do their darndest to help you find paraquat, even though they're not legally allowed to sell it. And in order to use it, like if you have a farm, you can't just use it. You have to be a licensed applicator. And in order to do that, you have to take a test periodically, and you have to go to classes where they teach you how to use it and how to protect yourself. And the EPA on the label, when it registers a pesticide, it says, and the label's massive, you can read it online, but it says you have to use this protective equipment. You have to spray it at these times of day. You can only use this much, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a long protocol in place that is very thoroughly investigated before the product is on the market, and so these are just more details. They're totally glossed over in these kind of news stories. And you're just so told, like, well, I mean, there's this person from the EPA and she says it's bad news. Like, okay, I guess it's good enough for me. I think it sort of plays on people's ignorance and fear, and not that the average person should understand this because they have lives to live and all that. But it's disingenuous of people like Gillum and McCormick to take advantage of this and sort of build this kind of corkboard conspiracy. And Gillum says that, these secret documents from the manufacturer were left on my doorstep at night, And then when you read the documents, as Chuck just sort of alluded to, it's internal discussions between company lawyers and company scientists, and they're saying, the EPA might put restrictions on this because they respond to political pressure and emotional rhetoric. We give them the science, and that doesn't convince them. And and again, this is in those documents too, and it's been replicated in other studies. Is they say, people drink this and they die, or they don't wear the proper equipment and then they get sick. So how do we mitigate this as a company? I mean, we put it on the label. EPA mandates that we do that, but that's not enough. So these are the kind of internal discussions, but Gillum presents those as this is the company trying to maneuver around regulation, which is just the silliest idea in the world, I think.
Do you have another minute?
Go ahead, Josh.
Anything for you.
I went back to the 2017 article I wrote on frozen addicts, and I'm just going to read footnote 6 because it.
Oh my God!
It says.
Now this is good podcasting right here.
It says in English what I was babbling about before. Okay.
Yeah.
Almost anyone looking at the chemical structures of MPP plus and the herbicide paraquat below would conclude that they would act in a similar manner. That is how similar their structures are and look. But they do not. Paraquat's primary toxicity is in the lungs. This is almost certainly due to the fact that the herbicide does not have properties that would allow it to cross the blood-brain barrier, not even close. Neither does MPP, which was the actual neurotoxin, but keep in mind that MPP plus enters the brain as its precursor MPTP, which has just the right properties to cross. So it sneaks in there, and then the brain does the work itself and kills the neurons.
For the sake of our audience, I'm going to go back to your dressing metaphor and point that one version just hides itself in a costume that sneaks into the blood-brain barrier and then whips off the costume to become a neurotoxin. Would that be fair?
Yeah, that's great. I love that. That's helpful for simpletons like myself. We're getting kind of long, but just the final thing I want to stress is there's been a ton of research on this, and some of the best studies that have been done, they look at workers who worked at manufacturing facilities that make paraquat. And this is important because these are the people that will have the absolutely highest exposure to this chemical because they are making it, right? So when you compare these people and you have good exposure data because you know how long they worked at this place, you know what their shifts are, you know what their specific job was, you have biomonitoring data, so you know how much they have in or on them. And when you compare their rates of Parkinson's to the general population, it's the same, right? So that I think should conclusively settle this.
Should.
But here we are, right, because of lawyers. So
the one other thing I'd like to throw in, just from another political reference that I find in there that is amusing, is that often they'll talk about people using the playbook, this mystical playbook, which was invented, I guess, by the tobacco people. They invented the playbook. So the playbook always is presented as a disparaging thing. But the fact of the matter is that the playbook actually tells you how to communicate your thoughts, and that playbook is used by everybody because it turns out to be it's an effective way to make your points. Whether the points are valid or not, that's something else. But in terms of how to communicate your thoughts, the playbook has the answers.
Right. Yeah, that's a helpful point. One other difference we can point to is that tobacco, if used according to the label, we could say kills you, right? So if you use it as it's intended, it's bad for you. Whereas, a pesticide like paraquat, used as intended, it's not bad for you, right? In fact, it's good for you because it kills the weeds that would choke out the crops that produced your food, So, I mean, that's a fundamental difference as well. The tobacco industry, and they did shady things back in the day. It's been pointed out that they had some of the best science showing that their products were harmful, but they were doing it in their own labs and keeping it locked up. And then publicly they were saying, it could be diet, it could be genetics, blah, 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 right? They maintained that for decades. So they did sleazy things, as Josh says about, people who combine Advil and Tylenol, right? But that's not what's going on here. This
whole podcast is going to result in our loss of all of our corporate shill money. So that's a whole nother $1 off the budget.
I know, man. Mr. Monsanto just came to my door and he was like, "You better shut your face or you're not getting a check."
They've come for the car. It looks like they're coming for the kids.
How was your raise this year, guys?
I bought a 23-year-old Lexus with my raise.
Just one interesting tidbit. If you take a look at the structure of MPTP, it's in many ways similar to that of nicotine. Nicotine sure goes to the brain, does it not?
Oh, yeah.
It does.
Yeah. That's
the visual. You missed the visual. You lost the whole story here.
It was cute, though.
It's okay. That was for you, too. Okay. All right. I don't want to cut you off. Anything else, Josh? Because I always value hearing your thoughts.
The chemistry is pretty clear cut on this.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, let me tell people the title of that article, because you wrote it in 2017, but then you re-released it, shall we say? You did a great assist version just a couple months ago.
Yeah, a lot of people read it,
Yeah.
and so like a real lot. And I guess I did re-release. I do that once in a while with stuff that has evergreen potential. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a fascinating story what this guy did. And keep in mind, this happened to him because of an impurity,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we're talking about a pretty small amount of whatever's in there, and he's injecting it, and it's probably, I don't know, a few milligrams or something.
Mm-hmm.
So, look what that does, and look what occupational exposure to paraquat do. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about way different ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, yeah. It's a fascinating story. So Josh's article, the new one, I should say, it's called "Could Chemicals Have Caused Michael J. Fox's Parkinson's?" It happened before. And you're talking, of course, about Barry Kidston, who was this chemistry grad student at UC Berkeley, where all great ideas originate. So go read that article. It's just a fascinating example of science from history. So that's great. Go ahead and read that, and then read all our stuff. Go to our website. It's acsh.org. And you can find everything all of us have written there. And then you can follow us on social media as well. The organization is at ACSH.org. Josh is at Josh Bloom ACSH. It's a very clever name there. And then, yes. And then I'm just at Cam J English. You can follow us. We'll talk to you. If you're mean to Josh, he will insult you. And then all his followers will jump in. It's going to be a bad time. Don't do that. And Chuck, of course, is the smart one, and he's not on social media. So yeah, you just have to reach out to us via email, and then Chuck will answer your questions very thoughtfully. And with that, we're done. We'll see you next week. Thank you as always. Have a lovely 7 days, everyone. Talk to you soon.
Boy.